While I was compiling the list of my top 10 favorite albums, I had to get honest with myself about a couple of things. I used to consider myself to be a very well-rounded music fan. I took classical piano for years and eventually got my grade 8 conservatory piano. I taught myself some basic guitar chords and did the whole folky songwriting thing. I grew up listening to all the bands from the 60s and the 70s that my parents used to love. Then in the 80s I dabbled a little bit with heavy metal. In the 90s I was into the alternative and grunge stuff before finally finding my home in punk rock. In terms of live music, I've always just said that I'm a massive fan of live music and that I could enjoy concerts from almost any genre, from classical to jazz to punk and hardcore. So on the whole, I thought that I had a very well-rounded appreciation of music. And then I sat down to make this top 10 list. And first of all, I realized in terms of listening to music, I don't actually spend a lot of time listening to music ever since getting really into the whole podcast thing. Usually if I'm listening to something with headphones on, it's a podcast. But when I do listen to music, it's punk rock. There's just not much else I'll pop on if I'm listening to some music. And then when it comes to live music, unless it's a show that I'm seeing with my wife, it's almost inevitably going to be a punk show. At the end of the day, I had to admit to myself that I'm pretty one-dimensional when it comes to my musical appreciation. So on this list, you're not going to see my favorite artists from other genres such as Our Lady Peace, The Cranberries, Live, Collective Soul, Three Doors Down, Christina Perri, Mumford & Sons, Metallica's Load and Reload albums, Weezer's eminently singable Blue album, even Ace of Base's excellent The Bridge album, which is a band I'm sure you would never have thought I would be saying in this video. But here's the other thing, I'm even narrow-minded in terms of the time period I focus on. All the bands on this top 10 list cover only a 17-year period from 1994 until 2011. 3 of them are actually from 2007, which apparently was a great year of music for me. I actually always considered myself to be a 90s punk until I made this list and realized that only 3 of the albums in my top 10 are from the 90s and the remainder are from this millennium, so maybe I'm more of a Knots punk. But with that very narrow time window being covered, none of the older music that I still love will make this list, such as the Beatles, the Moody Blues, Janis Joplin, Cat Stevens, Simon and Garfunkel, Deep Purple, or Neil Young and his Crazy Horse. I love that album still. But I'm not done yet, because my geography is even a narrow focus. Of these top 10 albums, fully half of the bands come from California. So what this all says is basically I'm a 2000s California punk in terms of my musical tastes. If that's not your musical taste too, you might find this video a little boring, so you might want to just skip to the end where the outtakes are. But if you are into the punk thing, then hey, join me on this top 10. The only rules I've put on myself to make this list are, first of all, only 1 album from each band so that I don't end up with like 5 Rancid albums and 5 AFI albums, and no greatest hits compilations, because that would kind of be cheating, wouldn't it? So without further ado, let's dive into the top 10 list. My number 10 band comes from London, England. The band is called the Jaypee Conspiracy. The album is called This Machine, and it was released in 2007. If you're a fan of melodic ska punk, you need to check out the Jaypee Conspiracy. I tend to like this subgenre of ska-core even more, which is not quite as melodic, but in terms of excellent albums, this one and one other ska punk band actually make my list here. It's definitely well worth checking out if that's your thing. Number 9 is a band from Fullerton, California called Social Distortion. The album is White Light, White Heat, White Trash from 1996. I actually thought this album was going to hit my top 5 for sure, but as I made the list, I kept coming up with stuff that I liked even more. I love Mike Ness and his songwriting, but there's something about his singing through his nose that puts him down at number 9, I guess. We finally hit an international band with my number 8, who come from Rennes in Brittany, France, and the band is The Decline. The album is Broken Hymns for Beating Hearts, which was released in 2011. They are just the type of gritty street punk band that I would expect to find in a divey bar or a smoky pub, but they're not to be confused with my favorite melodic punk band, which is also called The Decline, but without the exclamation mark, who are from Perth, Australia, and who would have made this list had I done a top 20 or even a top 15. For my number 7, we're going to return to California, to LA, and we have NoFX with their album Punk in Drublic from 1994. I also really enjoy NoFX's album So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes, but they have a huge discography, and Mike Burkett is such a prolific songwriter and such a great songwriter. It really puts to mind Tim Armstrong in terms of just his abilities as a songwriter. So it's not super easy to pick just one album for NoFX. Okay, here's the other ska punk band I was talking about just a minute ago. This band is from New Brunswick, New Jersey. They're called Streetlight Manifesto, and the album is Somewhere in the Between from 2007. Streetlight Manifesto is a band that arose from a band called Catch-22, who did an amazing album called Keys Be Nights. Some of the members from Catch-22 ended up forming Streetlight Manifesto with a somewhat similar sound, but there's something about them that I like even more than Catch-22. As I mentioned when I was talking about the Jaypee Conspiracy, I do enjoy the grittier ska-core sound a little bit more, but I can't find a really solid start-to-finish album of that genre other than maybe the Suicide Machines battle hymns, but I didn't come up with an album from that particular subgenre that made this list. There's nothing wrong with Streetlight Manifesto though, they're pretty awesome. And I get to see them in concert again in the fall. That'll be fun. Number 5 is the greatest female vocalist in punk rock. She comes from Australia originally, but this band is from Los Angeles, California. It is the Distillers, and the album is Sing Sing Death House from 2002. I'm super excited by the rumors that the Distillers have reformed to go back on tour. So I hope it's true, and if they do, I sure hope they come up my way at some point. It's been many years since I've seen them in concert. For number 4, I have the sole Canadian entry to the list. They come from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and they are the Dreadnots with the album Legends Never Die from 2007 again. I've mentioned in previous videos that the Dreadnots are my very favorite live band to see. They're just an incredible amount of fun, and all their albums are so solid. I could have easily put their album Polka's Not Dead in this spot, Or even their most recent album, Foreign Skies, which has something about it that if you listen to it from the very first note all the way through to the end of the album, there's this arc to it that's almost like a novel. The experience of listening to that album from start to finish is pretty incredible. But Legends Never Die is the one that takes it for this spot. In terms of the folk punk, Celtic punk genre, the Dreadnots just edge out Flogging Molly's Float or Speed of Darkness albums. It's such an amazing genre of music. I love it. Top 3 time, and number 3 is a band from Chicago, Illinois called Rise Against. Their album Siren Song of the Counterculture was released in 2004, and there's one thing that always amused me about this album, and that is the first single from that album that got repeated radio play was a lovely acoustic ballad called Swing Life Away.
We live on front porches and swing life away. We get by just fine here on the way.
However, for anyone who enjoyed that soothing tune enough to go out and purchase the CD from their local music store, would pop in the CD and this is the first thing they would hear. So yeah, that always just kind of amused me. But yeah, Siren Song of the Counterculture, fantastic album. Here's the part where I even shocked myself. I thought that the album I have on my number 2 spot was going to be my number 1 for sure, no brainer. I even have the tattoo for this album. The band, of course, is from Berkeley, California. And this is Rancid with their And Out Come the Wolves album that came out in 1995. This is an album that up until now I stated was my number 1 album of all time, hands down. I'm going to talk more about why it isn't when I talk about my number 1 album, but first let's focus on And Out Come the Wolves. My very favorite Rancid songs are actually on other albums. The songs Black Lung and 1998 are on their Life Won't Wait album, and their B-sides and C-sides album, funnily enough, actually has some of my very favorite songs as well, like Sick Sick World, Tattoo, Just a Feeling, and I Wanna Riot. But the thing is, every single song on And Out Come the Wolves is totally solid. From start to finish, it's an amazing album, and taken in its entirety, it just can't be beat by any other Rancid album. Every single time I listen to it, I just can't help but feel happy. Just as a side note, I wanted to put Operation Ivy's self-titled album in this top 10 list, but since 2 of their 3 members went on to form 2 of the 3 founding members of Rancid, I thought there was probably too much overlap to include both Op Ivy and Rancid. It would sort of fall under the same category as including more than 1 album from the same band almost. So Operation Ivy needs to get mentioned, but this is why they didn't actually make the list. And now for the highly controversial in my own mind number 1 pick. This band is from Ukiah, California. The band is called AFI, which is short for A Fire Inside. The album is from 2003 and it's called Sing the Sorrow. So why is Sing the Sorrow number 1 and not And Out Come the Wolves? Well, here's the thing. Rancid's complete discography and catalog of songs far outweighs AFI for me. AFI had a period where I absolutely loved them, and I talked about that in another video as well. But then their music changed and shifted, and I kind of lost interest in the direction they went as a band. So while Rancid is definitely my favorite band, and their music as a whole definitely beats out AFI for me, if I'm looking at strictly individual albums, there's nothing that hits me on the same emotional level like Sing the Sorrow does. The pure, raw energy of it just gets me so fired up. If I can use a bit of a fire inside pun. Every single time I put it on, there's just a raw, screaming emotion that comes out of that album that I've never experienced on any other album ever. So when it came right down to it, I had to put Sing the Sorrow as my #1 album of all time. And that completes my top 10. What do you think? What's your #1 album of all time? Do you want me to do another 10 list with my 11 to 20 albums? I have it ready to go if that's something that interests you. Or what else do you want to hear me do a top 10 of? I'm really interested in hearing other ideas. So anyhow, thanks for watching and keep rocking. Hey, it's Josh. Thank you so much for watching. If you wouldn't mind just crushing that like button, smashing that subscribe button, and chucking the link for this video with someone who you think would enjoy it, by golly, I would appreciate that. Cheers. When it comes to listening to music, I don't necessarily street punk that I would street punk band that I would I never did find one of that subgenre that would get that I never their albums Siren Song of the Culture. However, anyone who heard that beautiful to go out to the local music store and pick up that CD. I'm gonna lose my battery. Would pop that CD into their stereo. The song's Black Luck. So Operation Ivy needs to get mentioned, but that's why they didn't get the. So Operation Ivy needs to get mentioned, but they didn't make the list as a. And if I am getting out to see a live concert, unless it's something I'm seeing with my life.